everyone. You are listening to the Rachael Maves Podcast, and I'm your host, Rachael Maves. Today, we are talking to Jim Cowen, the Executive Director at the Collaborative for Student Success, a nonprofit dedicated to lifting and defending strong practices and K-12 education policies, driving improved outcomes for all students. Jim completed his undergraduate degree from Marquette University and his master's degree from Georgetown University. Prior to his role at the Collaborative, he served as a U.S. Naval Officer and honed his expertise in communications and public relations during his time as Senior Vice President at Ogilvy Public Relations Worldwide. Jim, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Good to see you, Rachel.
Good to see you, too. I'm really excited about this conversation. And like always, we start with just the opportunity to tell your story. How did you end up in this role? What was your path and trajectory? I mean, you kind of found a unique niche in education, especially coming from the U.S. as a U.S. Naval Officer.
Yeah, I had someone tell me once that I'm kind of like the Forrest Gump of public education. His jobs, minus the skills in football, because Forrest Gump is a really good football player.
And runner, yeah.
And runner. Yeah, I did not come into the education sphere with the pedigree that many of my colleagues have. As you read off, I started straight out of high school. I guess my story is a good one for education because I thought I was prepared for more than what I was through my high school. It was a good high school. I did well in my high school, but I wanted to go to U.S. Naval Academy, and I realized as I was entering my senior year, I was nowhere prepared for the U.S. Naval Academy, and I thought I was. And I thought I had done everything that I was supposed to do. And I clearly hadn't, reached the level of competency that I needed to. But I was able to get a scholarship that had me do some remediation and I had to join the military as an enlisted sailor, go through basic training, go do some remedial courses in physics and calculus and some English as well. And then I would get a full ride scholarship as either in the ROTC or in the U.S. Naval Academy, appointment academy.
Wow.
And after going through all that, an extra year and a half of my life, I decided I'm going to school. And I went to Marquette University and I loved it. And so I had that sort of like appreciation for like I wasn't ready, and I was like not going to let that happen again to me. And I think that primed me for other adventures later in life. I then, served in the Navy for, a good a little over 10 years, but it took me, through deployments across the world, and then landed me in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, where I served there, met my wife, then my girlfriend, and then my, future wife, and we settled here. I ended up getting a job at Ogilvy Public Relations, and that was fantastic to learn about how to build like really strong communications campaigns, and engagement and advocacy work. And I was tapped by a friend and mentor of mine who worked then at the Collaborative, which had just started up. She said, "Hey, are you up for a really aggressive campaign around school standards?" And I go, "I don't know anything about school standards." "Well, I need a deputy, and I need someone who can help me better understand the military." I go, "I'm your guy." And so I then jumped in and made that leap. And from then on, I then ramped up to be the executive director of the Collaborative and have been here ever since.
I always find it fascinating when people who have had other careers in areas of focus and specialty come into education. I'd love to hear, as you were making that transition, what were like your ahas or things that really struck you about education from a fresh lens and perspective?
Yeah, I think there's two things that struck me. One, there were a lot of things that were exactly the same as what you saw in other fields, like the health field. Some of our clients were in the health business. Some of them were in the national defense business. And there are many of the same kind of silos that happen in those as you see in education. There are people who have been there for an awful long time who, and sometimes there's an inability to see outside of the sphere that you're working in.
For sure, yeah.
And not creating things that are tangible and that can be understood by people outside the bubble. I think that's just something that happens in any group. What I didn't think about the education world that was unique was the level of devotion was something deeper than I felt in some of the other industries. There's always people who are, going to be very committed to what they're doing for their national security or health, with those fields that I was in. But it was different in the education sphere because I started to work with teachers and see the level of devotion that teachers gave to what they did, and that was super motivating for me to see. So I'd say those are some of the similarities and differences that I saw.
Yeah, that it's affirming to hear you say that, because I've often felt like most people get into education because they actually feel this like calling towards it. It's like this moral imperative for kids, which I think is a different driver than other fields oftentimes, and such a wide group, I'd love just knowing your background and what you just shared with us about not feeling prepared and the way in which you went through high school and the impact that then had later. You're in this, great role now leading the collaborative. How does that experience really drive and shape the work that you're doing now?
State that question one more time for me. I want to hear that one more time.
Yeah. How does your experience as a high schooler not feeling prepared and feeling like you had what you needed to be successful and what you wanted to do, how does that drive the work that you're doing now at the collaborative?
It is so aligned, and I really haven't written about this yet because it's so personal. But I feel it in the groups and the initiatives that we're doing now, and with my own kids. Right, I have 2 daughters who are teenagers, and I'm very, very much always placing what we're doing into what does it mean to the people who are closest to me, which are my 2 daughters. We did an initiative when I first started out, which was we called it Game Plan for Success, and what we tried to do was demonstrate how success in certain things like sports is extremely similar to what you need to be successful in your education experience. You've got to have a certain bar set for you that is high enough that pushes you to do something.
Yeah.
You have to have a coach that helps you to reach that bar and push you to do things that you may not have done on your own. You've got to have some sort of measurement that calculates how close you were to reaching that goal, whether or not you actually did reach it or not. And you've got to have a series of support networks around you, be they coaches, family members, friends, who are encouraging you and providing you the kind of support to keep doing that. Unfortunately, parents, as I did too, like as my kids were playing sports, man, that resonated so well with me. I'm like, that all makes sense to me. And if my kid needed a coach in, like a soccer coach to help them with, they wanted to be a striker, but they needed to improve on something, I'm down with doing whatever we got to do, or in swimming or cross country.
Yeah.
We tend to not put the same level of commitment sometimes as parents to what we need for the classroom.
Yeah.
So that was something that I felt very deeply about. I think there's a similarity there.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it's a gap of knowledge and understanding. And how do we create those connections and help build awareness and support? Yeah, I really do believe that working alongside and with parents is such an untapped resource in education.
Absolutely. Yeah. If the parent is not, personally, like if the parent is not engaged on it, then on what is happening in the classroom, it's really tough for the teachers to be the sole provider. Particularly in underserved communities. Like if you're only receiving the instruction in the classroom, and then you're not having it reinforced, be it by what you hear from other mentors or coaches or the people that are close to you outside the classroom, what does that mean? We have done, as a nation are doing better with things like around reading, right? We are developing we all have a good sense of what it means to have a healthy reading environment for your home. I think, most parents know, like, I need to read to my kids frequently when they're little, because that message is getting through. The science of reading is now taking up great momentum, including in state legislatures.
Yeah, that's
where it is now no longer something that's just a passing thought. No, there's a lot of evidence that's painting to, like, this is how it needs to be taught in the classroom. This is what's going to make a difference. So we have that understanding of that healthy environment for reading.
Yeah.
I'm not doing the same thing for math right now. And that's one of the things that I'm very concerned about. And from the collaborative standpoint is, like, how do we define a healthy math home environment? And there's lots of things that are pushing against that.
Yeah. Well, that is a perfect segue kind of into our next question, is what keeps you up at night? I mean, education over the last few years has just had so many hits and really massive things to try to navigate. From your lens of what you're seeing across the collaborative and nationally, what is it that really keeps you up at night?
Yeah.
Education.
I'm glad you said education, because, like I said, I've got 2 teenage daughters, so there's plenty that keep who's a lot.
Yeah, with you on
you anyway, yeah, lots. But for education, so as I was saying, like, one of the biggest things I'm concerned about is our progress on math. Like, we have made it, so acceptable for someone to be not a math person. We don't blink twice about saying that and excusing it, basically. And I think a lot of it's to protect our kids if they are struggling with it. But I don't think it does kids any favors long term to do that. And I think that's something we've definitely tried to do over the last year in our work around math at the collaborative, is to start to put the kibosh on it and being okay to say that I'm just not a math person. Stop saying it. And is that going to change the world? No, but it's a start. And if enough people recognize that we should stop saying that, then that's one thing. That's from a narrative standpoint. But I'm concerned about the overall competency of math in the states, and I'm worried. Next week, I'm not sure where this podcast will air, but next week we're going to see the rollout of the National Assessment for Education Progress.
Yeah.
And it's probably not going to be good. I mean, fingers crossed that somehow it's going to be really great news around, the kids are doing really great in the country. I don't think we're going to see that. I think it's going to be, some news that's going to show that kids are not doing really great, particularly around numeracy. And so the question is, like, kind of like, what do we do with that now in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like you, really interested to see what those scores are and to be able to understand, are there bright spots? Are there places that we can look and learn from where we're seeing that students were doing well? Like, I'm always looking for those spaces too, so I'm excited for those scores to come out.
Yeah. I think that there are bright spots, and there are things that are happening in states. And I do think that that's important for us to talk about when those scores do come out. When they come out, they're probably not going to be good. We need to acknowledge that and not pretend like it's not there, because it is there and it's bad and it's something we've got to address. But it doesn't mean we sit on our hands either. I think the question is like we say, we have to do more about it. And what is that going to be? And one of the things that, we keep saying is that, one, we've got to see more commitment from states, and we are seeing some commitment from states from a legislative standpoint, where, leaders are actually forming legislative plans in their states to do more around math. Colorado is one example of a state that's doing a phenomenal job. Alabama, has now in place a Numeracy Act where there's dedicated efforts and tactics and strategies in the state, to address the things that need to be done.
Yeah.
We are very excited about things like accelerated advancement or automatic enrollment, which is a policy that several states, including like North Carolina and Texas and Washington State, are putting into place or have put into place, where a kid no longer has to opt in to moving into advanced math, but if they have met a certain standard of progress in math, you are automatically put into a new math class.
Yeah.
And that's a great way to ensure that kids that may have been counted out. In fact, there's a great story in North Carolina that spurred that whole legislation that was called Counted Out. That prevented a lot of kids from not having the chance to do so.
Yeah.
Move on to take those advanced courses.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because we've had this wave, like you mentioned earlier, of this focus on literacy. And we saw during that time a lot of massive state initiatives around literacy. So I feel like we have the groundwork set for how to do this. Now it's kind of I feel like people are looking for the what. Like, what is the area within math that we can anchor into and then start to push it forward? Those are great examples that you just gave too.
I think you hit on a really good point there, and that there is this great momentum around science of learning and science of reading, and I want to try to separate the two because they're not the same thing, right? I think people, and particularly legislators, are going to have the temptation of trying to find the same blueprint that worked for reading for math. Yes. And it doesn't exist. It's not the same thing. There really isn't a science of math that's going to be the exact same thing as a science of reading.
Yeah.
So I think that's important that we differentiate that and help legislators and states to realize, like, there are good things that can happen, and to look at the evidence-based efforts that are showing progress in math, and there are ones there. Like we've talked a little bit about, the auto enrollment policy. Like, that is a great way for states to show interest, and a lot of other states are starting to want to mimic and repeat what they're seeing in states like North Carolina, Texas, Washington. I know Indiana is looking at this as well, and several others. But there are some really good high quality instructional materials that we know are out there that are doing a great job, right?
Yeah.
That should be adopted by classrooms and by teachers to implement those. We know that there's a lot of good professional learning options that are out there for teachers that can help them to be better at sort of providing that instruction. It's not enough to just drop the instructional materials in a classroom and expect every teacher to know how to implement those, right? Like, they have to know, there are different procedures and that need to happen, and the teachers need those kind of professional learning supports as well. I talked about the automatic enrollment idea, and then just those various teacher preparation methods, particularly for getting more good math teachers into the system too.
Yeah.
And getting more teachers in the system is not a new problem. This has been around for a long time, but there are groups out there that are doing really stellar jobs of trying to create more teachers in the math sphere that are just better prepared for getting in there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've brought forward a lot of different ideas and initiatives. Are there any others that, when you think about how, like, concrete ways we can start to move forward, that you would say, let's start here and push this?
Yep. What I'd say, high instructional material learnings and teacher support, things like Zern, we know are really strong methods of helping classrooms with their instructional materials. The high quality professional learning ideas we know are strong and should be in there. More instructional time. I know that is just the one. It's like, look, there's only so many hours in the day you can do this. We realize that, but anything we can do to increase the amount of time that kids have with good instruction around math competency is going to help.
Yeah. I'm so glad that as we're having this conversation, you're pairing high quality instruction with high quality instructional materials. Because I do feel like there's been this narrative in the last few years where if we can just get the curriculum in people's hands, it's going to solve all the problems. And I really do believe, having been a teacher, your curriculum is great, but if you don't understand the pedagogy side of what that means and looks like to operationalize and have it come to life in your classroom, there's still a major gap there. And I personally don't feel like we're talking about that enough. Like, how do we get that support and build it up? And we have all the research that actually shows what that looks like to move the needle for kids. But
yeah, totally agree. I mean, in the military, like on a ship, it was a curse when someone would come to your ship who was representing some, contractor would say, "We have this upgrade for your system," and they'd come in and they would upgrade your system with this whole new, radar or some sort of detection and weapon, and then they'd leave and they go, "All right, you guys, good luck. We know you're getting underway tomorrow." We go, "Whoa, where are you going? What'd you do?" And I think that, that analogy is not lost on me when in education. Like, it's the same thing when those guys walk off and they go, here's your curriculum, here's your new curriculum and your instruction materials. And the teachers look at them and blink and go, wait a minute, they don't have the experience or they haven't had the preparation to be able to implement. It's like having a Ferrari, but driving it backwards and forwards in your driveway. Like you got to get on the open road to know how to use that thing to the best of its ability. And so, for states who are recognizing it, that we applaud them for being like, hey, you can't just drop the materials and think it's just going to magically appear in people's brains.
Yeah. No, it takes a little bit more than that for sure. So this is our final question, Jim, and I love this question because I always get such a variety of answers. But what question in education are we not asking that we're not hearing about that we really should be?
So there's a couple, and one of them I'll say is based on, okay, this is probably revealing too much information, but I had a conversation with my 16-year-old daughter's boyfriend last night. Because he's kind of an entrepreneur. He has some businesses that he's doing himself. And we had a really interesting talk about education. And he goes, I don't necessarily feel that I'm getting the return on investment from my high school education. This is a bright kid. And I'll tell you, like, I know it's not good for your daughter's dad to be talking this, to be liking the boyfriend this much, or like, because it's generally it's a kind of the kiss of death for, right? But I thought it was just such a great, insightful comment, because I think that is a question that we really need to pose across the entire education sphere. Like, just thinking about your own kid, is your own kid getting the return on investment that they are putting in to their high school education at the end of it? We're getting them into a school, but are we really preparing them with the instruction that they've had to take on a meaningful career and becoming, a self-sufficient contributing member of society? Yeah. I think we need to really consider what that ROI is. Yeah. And that should transfer across beyond just college, right? I have to really give a hat tip to Indiana and Secretary of Education Katie Jenner there, who's doing a really awesome job by bringing in a new high school diploma called Hoosier Plus, and it's based on this idea of helping kids to explore different opportunities along the way and not be punished for trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives. Like, how can you offer different, I think badges is what they're sort of calling them, around things like public service, and trades, and there's a military one as well, but it's all designed to sort of give kids an on-ramp to an idea around what they might want to do, and an off-ramp, but it doesn't punish them or put them way behind in their educational progress. And I think that's really good. And again, to get back to this conversation I had with this young gentleman was that he goes, there are some courses that I just love. Like I could stay there, well past the when the bell goes off, because for him it's economics. He wants to talk about economics because he has his own business. So he wants to talk about supply and demand. He wants to talk about, inelastic cost curves, because he sees it in real motion. Yeah. Like, how do we how do we create an environment? I don't just say like make learning fun, because that feels very, that's like cop out. But how do we get people to see the reality and the relevance in the classroom activities? And how do we make it so that you can get what you need and not be punished for not taking certain courses? I know this is a tough one, but just looking at it very, realistically.
No, I love that. And I'm hearing more and more conversation about that from states, but then also district leaders around that academic return on investment. Like how do we truly know, and what does that mean and look like? And how do we leverage all the data that we have to be able to make informed decisions? To drive strategic planning. And I feel like there's some big key components that are missing in our current structures and systems, for sure.
Yeah. I'll say one other thing that I think we need to look at too is just how we're considering civics in our courses throughout the country, because this is something that has divided us so deeply right now. I think we need to really consider ways in which we can discuss elements of how we govern in a safe way that advances what a kid knows without feeling scary to someone right now. And this is a big one right now across the country. And so how do you make this happen without it feeling like some kids are being indoctrinated right now in the country?
Yeah. Gosh, if we could just as adults. I think that would be a really good place to start.
Can I ask you, Rachel, also, like with Parsec, I was looking at your site and you guys were talking about you're hosting this Measure What We Value Summit. And I swear, Rachel didn't give me $20 to say this out loud, but we were seeing like you guys have this summit on early February about measuring what you value, which I think is a great idea. And I actually think that's part of what the National Governors Association that's their big initiative right now too, is around quality measurement of student progress. Can you just tell me a little more about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that Parsec is really committed to is data. And I mean, as you know, all data isn't necessarily good data. And there's a wealth of data that we're not collecting and really giving like voice to. Mm-hmm. And some of that is the qualitative side of things. Like, how do we hear from students, from families, from community members about their experiences in the macro, but then also in the micro, in the classroom, but then all the way up to the way in which strategic planning and the initiatives are put into place have a ripple effect and an impact. And so what we're committed to is, how do we move beyond and not say that it's not anything that is of relevance, because it is. Quantitative data is extremely important, but how do we marry it with this qualitative side of things so that we can get the whole picture? And it's part of what drew me to Parsec, honestly, Jim, when I was at the county office and then also at CDE and TDOE. We would talk a lot about quantitative data being that data that gives you the blinking signal that says something's not working within our system. If the majority of our third graders aren't reading at grade levels, something's not working in our system. But then it requires an interrogation to get deeper to understand the why. And often that's actually going to come from experience, from the staff experience, from the student experience, from the family experience, to be able to shift and change to make sure that we're putting the right levers in place. So that when we talk about the Measure What We Value Summit, that's really what we're looking at. And the focus, the highlight that I think is extraordinarily powerful is that we bring in students that want to share their stories and experience. So we're highlighting and looking at, yes, Parsec as this quantitative data company, but listen to these students so that they can share the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of really great things, but then a lot of things that really we need to be thinking about as school leaders of how do we shift and change some of our practices.
I really love that. And those data levers, as you're talking about, and the flags, they're often lagging indicators, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so how far upstream was the lever that forced that? It's because it's not often just the one right before it. It's the one that's 3, 4 steps back. And how are you able to determine that's the case? Man, there's a great stuff by Dan Heath. If you've ever, for Chip and Dan Heath, the brothers, talk about this upstream thing. So love to read that too. I want to go to your conference. So, is it still in Fresno? I see it's in Fresno.
It is. Yeah. And that's where our headquarters are. We're pretty committed to the Valley and really trying to bring the Parsec community and others there so that it's uplifting that area. But yeah, I'll send you the information, Jim. I would love that. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This has just been a pleasure. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks a lot.